It was 9:45 and a school night. Oops. What was Ned Mahoney doing here at the house this late? All right, guys, that's it. Gym's closed for the night, I said. Ava stood holding the bag with both hands. Just a little more, she said. Nope, it's already past your bedtime. Ali's too. Let's go. A nasty scowl came onto her face. I don't need no goddamn bedtime, she said. She swung the bag hard and caught Ali off guard. It knocked him right to the floor. While he burst into tears, Ava started stomping up the stairs. That was until I made her come back and apologize, first to Ali and then to me. No more boxing this week, I said. You need a break. This isn't the way it's going to work in this house. Whatever, she said, in that really charming way adolescents can have. Then she turned to go. Like I said, good days and bad days. Sometimes, all at the same time. Chapter 73. Ava was still sulking when we got upstairs. She walked right by Mahoney, who was waiting in the front hall. Ned pointed at the kids as they went by, counting on his fingers. 3? He mouthed at me. Don't ask, I said. Also known as Ava. Good night, also known as Ava, he called up the stairs. Good night, Ava said without turning around. But at least she talked. Good night, Mr. Mahoney. Good night, Janny. Good night, John Boy. Good night, everyone. Janny and Ali liked Ned as much as I did. Once they were gone, though, he dropped the Uncle Ned act, and his face turned serious again. I hadn't spoken with him since the raid at the motel 3 nights earlier. I think this was the first time I ever saw him when he wasn't clean-shaven and raring to go. How you guys doing? I asked. They've been better. Todd's already home, but Barenberg's going to be in the burn unit for at least 2 more weeks, he told me, shaking his head. How about you? I said. You holding up? Ned shrugged. I've been spending most of my forced time off at the hospital with Bear's wife, but they're putting me back on tomorrow, he said. Is that a good thing? Sure. Nothing worse than sitting on the sidelines. I need to be in on this, or I'm going to go crazy. I could have guessed Ned would feel responsible for what happened. I'd probably feel the same way, for better or worse. Listen, Ned, if you ever need to talk about... Thanks, he said, but I'm already seeing one of the bureau shrinks. She's pretty good, actually. A lot better looking than you, too. I was glad to see the trademark sense of humor wasn't dead, anyway. Well, how about I pour you a drink, then? I've got some good scotch I think even you could appreciate, I said. Actually, Ned took a step toward the door. His keys were still hooked on his finger, and he had that look in his eye, the one that said he'd never really left work behind. I was wondering if you wanted to go for a ride, he said. I've got something you might be interested in seeing. This is good. You want to see it. I nodded. Of course I do. Chapter 74. Half an hour later, Mahoney and I showed up at a 4-story red brick building on the corner of 6th and P Streets, across from Masjid Al-Qasim Mosque. We parked in the back and took the stairs to a 3rd-floor railroad apartment. Inside, it was mostly empty, just a few lawn chairs and long folding tables loaded up with listening equipment. 2 agents sat in the chairs, both of them with headphones on. Another was at the kitchen counter with 2 laptops in front of him. I didn't know any of these agents, but Mahoney's kind of a rock star with the surveillance crews. He introduced me to Shel Kravitz in the kitchen and pointed out Howard Green and Andrew Landry with the headphones on. Thanks for calling, Mahoney told Kravitz. We'll try to stay out of the way. No problem. Kravitz worked while they talked. She had half a dozen different camera views up on 2 screens and scrolled through them with an external keyboard hooked up to both computers. Most of what I saw didn't look like much. An empty hallway, a classroom of some kind, a dark alley. Isha prayers let out about an hour ago, she told us. I'm not sure what the holdup is. And nobody's going in after them? Ned asked. When was the last time you took someone down in a mosque? Kravitz said, or a church for that matter. It's too damn complicated. Besides, we've got this covered. I listened but didn't say anything. This wasn't my op. All Mahoney had told me in the car was that intel from the Bureau's Al-Aila informant had been coming in fast and furious. Tonight was supposed to be some kind of takedown. As for who they were going after, he had no idea. It was another hour before anything significant happened. Ned and I were talking quietly in the corner when one of the listening agents put up a hand and snapped his finger several times. Here we go, Kravitz said. We went over and stood behind her where we could see. She had pulled up 2 full-screen views. It looked like the front and back entrances of the mosque. A second later, one of the double front doors opened from the inside, and a woman in a hijab and long coat started backing out onto the front walk. What the hell? It took a second to see the man in the wheelchair. Once they'd cleared the door, the woman did a 180 and started pushing him toward the street. That's them? Mahoney said. They looked to be in their 60s, both of them heavy-set. The man had a thick, almost non-existent neck and just a few wisps of hair. The woman walked with a slight limp. Actually, she hobbled more than walked. Kravitz manipulated her controls to follow them on camera. "Wait for it," she said. "Wait for it." As soon as they turned onto the sidewalk, 2 unmarked cars were there. They pulled up to the curb and half a dozen agents jumped out. One of them took control of the wheelchair. Another cuffed the woman immediately. I could hear the man in the chair shouting now, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. It all happened very fast. They'd barely gotten the woman into one of the cars when a handicap-accessible van pulled up. The Bureau was clearly ready for this. They loaded up their mystery man, and everyone took off, leaving the corner just as quiet as it had been 60 seconds ago. I looked over at Ned when it was done. He was still staring at the screen, but his eyes looked blank. If I had to guess, I'd say he was thinking about that terrible scene at the motel from the other night. Was this couple responsible? Were they the planners? "Where are they taking those two?" I asked. "Any idea?" Mahoney shrugged. "To hell, I hope."
Chapter 75. The name of the man in the wheelchair was Faisal Ahmed Angawi. According to the prevailing intel, he went simply by Uncle within the organization. When they reached their destination, he was unloaded from the van and his blindfold was removed. "You maniacs! Where in God's name have you taken me?" he screamed at the FBI agents. "You are breaking your laws." They'd arrived in a vast unheated garage bay. Nothing too specific to clue him in to his exact whereabouts. There was a loading dock and a long row of empty steel shelving units along one wall. Several fluorescent light fixtures hung from the girdered ceiling far overhead. Also, it was quite cold. CIA interrogator Matt Sivitz stood in front of Angawi. His hands were clasped behind his back while the seated man ranted on and on. "I have my rights. You can't do this. I demand to see my attorney immediately." "Absolutely," Sivitz told him. "Just as soon as we're back in the real world, you can see a lawyer, Mr. Angawi, or should I call you Uncle?" The man squinted up at him while the corners of his mouth turned down. "Uncle? What's that supposed to mean?" "Don't be insulting. You know exactly what it means." Sivitz walked over and took a folding chair off the dock. When he set it across from the wheelchair and sat down, the 2 men were face to face. "Here's how I see it," he went on. "I think you're stuck in the middle of something here. You answer to your people back in Saudi. You pass orders to your operatives, but you don't control anything, not really. You got all the knowledge, but none of the power, and that's what makes you vulnerable. Am I close?" "Close to what?" Angawi shouted. "This is an outrage. I am a law-abiding man. Look at me." He reached for the wheels on his chair and found them locked. Sivitz held up a finger, which was also clearly a warning. "Actually, we've been watching you for a while." He unfolded a slip of paper from his pocket and glanced down at it. "Does the number 208522409 mean anything to you?" he said. "No. Maybe you didn't memorize the account numbers. How about Trinity Bank in Washington, Saudi British Bank in Riyadh?" Angawi was having none of it. "You can't intimidate me like this," he said between clenched teeth. "All of my accounts are perfectly legal." Sivitz nodded. "All of Faisal Ahmed Angawi's accounts are legal, that's true, but not the ones you've created under Muhammad Al-Atel, or Charity of Hope, or Chesapeake Properties." He watched the man while he spoke, gauging his expression. "That's where Al-Ila's money is coming in, isn't it? Please correct me any time here, just in case I have any small details wrong." The detainee didn't even show a glimmer of recognition, just pure seething hatred. "I have the right to an attorney," he said again. "I insist you take me back to the mosque this instant, right now. Do you hear me? Are you recording this?" Sivitz stood up fast. His chair slammed back into the concrete floor. "Listen to me," he said. "Listen very carefully. If you ever want to see your wife again, you're going to drop this pathetic act of yours and start talking to us. Who is your contact in Saudi Arabia?" "Are you threatening my wife?" The man was shaking with rage now. "No, Faisal, you are. What I'm saying is that you're both going to spend the rest of your lives in separate American prisons at the rate you're going. So tell me, who's running your ops in the district?" "This is illegal, racist, outrageous." "Where are Ethan and Zoe Coyle?" Angawi reeled back then and spit in the agent's face. Sivit saw red. He cocked a fist and came at him until Angawi was cowering with his hands up around his head. This meant he wasn't immune to pain. Good to know. It took another breath for Sivits to pull himself back from the edge. He wasn't going to hit this cripple. There would be no bruising, no physical proof of anything. Instead, he reached down and took Angawi's chin in his hand. "Look at me," he said. Slowly, the man's eyes came up to meet his. "You want to keep wasting your people the way you've been doing? You go right ahead. Put your wife on that list while you're at it. Doesn't make any difference to me. But just so you know, we're not leaving this place until you give me something I can use. And I will hurt you." Sivits stepped back and let go of his face. He looked visibly shaken now. "Names, Faisal. Places. Targets. You know what I want." Angawi took a deep breath. For the first time, it was hard to tell which direction he might go in. Maybe they were making some progress here after all. "I demand to see my attorney," Angawi said. It was so slow as to be mocking. Then he folded his hands on his lap and bowed his head, either at rest or in prayer. It was hard to tell which. Sivits watched for a minute, then turned away. He took out a pack of gum and unwrapped a piece as he headed for the door. "God damn, I miss cigarettes," he growled to no one. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 76. The hallway off the loading dock had been cleared of all personnel except for a lone armed agent at the far end. The guard pushed the elevator button for Sivits as he approached. "How's it going in there?" he asked. Sivits ignored him and got into the elevator without a word. He rode to the 6th floor where another agent was on post. Continuing down the hall, he passed a long row of dark offices until he came to the last one, with a light showing under the door. The placard next to it had his name engraved in block letters beneath a small rendering of the CIA seal. Sivits knocked twice, then opened the door with his key. Inside, Mrs. Angawi was sitting at the conference table with a female translator from Langley. Peter Lindley was there as well, and Evan Stroud from the Directorate of Intelligence, who had jobbed Sivits in for this one. All four had styrofoam containers of sandwiches and chips in front of them and bottles of water from the kitchen down the hall. "How are we doing in here?" Sivits asked. "Everybody nice and comfy?" The translator quietly relayed the question to Mrs. Angawi, who came back in a torrent of Arabic. "I want to leave this building, this city. It is a cursed place," the translator said, speaking for the woman as she went. "I shouldn't be here anymore. It's not safe for me. Tell her she'll be in a hotel tonight, perfectly secure. Once we have everything we need, other arrangements can be made," Stroud answered. Sivits kept his thoughts to himself. The woman seemed a little simple to him. It was amazing that the Bureau had put this much stock in her, although, by the same token, all of her intel had been good so far. Maybe her own people had underestimated her, too. He noticed that her hijab was down around her shoulders, even with these strange men in the room. That spoke volumes about her. "I want a new life," she went on through her translator. "My husband is not the same man that I married. I can't stand by and watch this happen anymore. I have friends here, American friends. Do you understand?" Yeah, I've got it," Sivits said. Somewhere in there she'd turned her attention on him. Maybe she felt like she wasn't getting anywhere with Stroud and Lindley. But he was no babysitter. "Ask who her husband reports to in Saudi Arabia. We need to know who's giving the orders here." "We've been trying, Matt. You do know that, right?" Stroud said. Pretty please? Sivitz's adrenaline was still high, and he didn't give a shit whose pay grade was up the scale from whose right now. Stroud nodded at the interpreter who posed the question to Mrs. Angawi. I don't know, she translated. What about the Coyle kid? Sivitz asked.